Hello, everyone. Are you ready to rumble? My name is Elena Wilcox. I'm Alison Dean's editor at Coach House Books, and I'd like to welcome you to the launch for Seconds Out. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement. Coach House Books, where this book was printed, is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon/evening as we shepherd Seconds Out into the world. I think that you'll love this book as much as I do. It's about women and fighting. Yeah, we'll get started right away. We'll let Alison throw the first punch. But before that, just a little bit of housekeeping. For all of you in the audience, you're welcome to add anything you like in the chat. You can talk amongst yourselves or send a note to Alison. And if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll get to those at the end. So we're gonna hear from Alison. We're gonna have a little video demonstration of some fighting, and then we're gonna have a conversation between Alison and Jennifer Doyle. So let's get started with Alison.
Hey, can you hear me? I will assume that's a yes. Thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about Seconds Out with Jennifer Doyle. What I want to start with is a video. I need to explain it because it won't make a lot of sense without, I guess, a bit of an introduction. Instead of reading from the book, what I did was I asked a bunch of women that I train with or women who train at gyms that I've trained at to make a kind of demo video. So some of them are demonstrating techniques that they love, like a 1-2, which will make sense in a minute when you see it. And some of them are teaching things. So I've asked people to actually demonstrate and explain the technique behind it. So my coach will make an appearance with me, but for the most part, it's my training partners. And one of the reasons I did that was completely selfish. I wanted everyone to see what I see. So there are different women. This is a small cross-section of women who agreed to make videos on short notice and did them at home or at work or with their kind of training bubbles. And you'll see them in different contexts. But one of the things that's really great, one of the things I love the most about training in this context is that it's not just your coach who influences you. It's not just your coach who teaches you. So I wanted to show you the women who've been teaching me and how they teach me and how we interact and how we kind of work through things together. So with that in mind, I would like to show the video. So this is about 8 minutes and it's just different women going through and showing techniques that they like or explaining how to do something.
Favorite things to do in sparring, especially when I can have my opponent back at the corner and back against the rope. So I will be aggressive and boom, 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 and then she will be against the rope or at the corner. Then I will punch her head so that her guard is up. Then I will shuffle to the side so she won't be able to see me, and I use this momentum to throw the punch to her stomach. It's true. And this works.
The combo I want to show you is a very, very simple one. And I chose it for 2 reasons. The first is that I learned it when I was in Santa Cruz with Alison at Allied MMA. And the second is that it actually works. It's very simple. So it's based on the tip, and the tip is mostly a setup. So you can, it's a front tip, and it's a same side combo. And as always, same side combos are quite efficient because people are not expecting 2 techniques coming from the same side. So it's very easy. You tip and you follow up immediately with a jab. So tip, you fall forward and follow up with the jab. And the jab is surprising because the person is going to protect themselves against the tip by dropping slightly their guard. So the jab comes as a surprise to the face, and then you can follow up with a cross. So tip, cross, jab, cross. That's it. Thank you.
Trust me, I'm not gonna hurt you. Don't move, okay? So I love this move because it's the only thing I can land on one of my first coaches, Dom Spate. This is an inside front low kick. So I'm gonna kick right here to the inside of his leg, but I'm going to make it sneaky by throwing a 1 right before. So it's gonna look like this. I'm gonna sneak up my back foot, and that gives me the momentum to kick the inside front leg. That's it.
Hi, I'm Adrienne. I'm going to show you a classic 1-2, which is a jab and a cross.
I've been boxing for about 3-4 years now, and today I'm going to show you my favorite move, which is a hook. So my 2 points for throwing a hook is basically your lower body and the position of your elbow. So your power comes from your legs, but mainly the rotation in your hips. That's kind of where all the power comes from, as your body is one unit. The next thing is you want to make sure your elbow is strong. You want to have that 90-degree angle and strong like a rod, so when you're throwing it, it's throughout the ear. Position of your thumb should be up as well. So this is kind of how I throw my hook. And I'll show you kind of when I'm not using my body, it's a lot less powerful, right? So practice that, make sure you're always using your body, your legs, and your elbows in the right place, and yeah, have fun.
Hey, I'm Annalise, and I'm going to be demonstrating one of my favorite combos, which is a jab, slip, 3-4 to the body.
Hi, I'm Janelle, and I've been training boxing for a few years now. One of my favorite drills to practice is head movement, as it can be crucial once you get into the ring for sparring and eventually having fights and stuff. So one way to practice that, you can use hand wraps. You can tie it to any types of support. In our gym, we have boxing bags that I've tied it to. And if this is the center line, or if this is a punch that somebody's going to be throwing at you, you want to keep your head away from it, right? And one way you can do that is through a roll. So having your hand wrap right here, all you're going to do is simply roll under it. Practice rolling, keep your hands up as you roll. And once you get comfortable with this, you can move with it, you can move forward, you can move back, and eventually you can start throwing in punches as you roll. So for example,
Hi, I'm Ale. I'm going to be showing a classic combination of a jab cross hook, slip, slip, cross hook.
Hey, I'm Mia. I'm going to show some teeps, which is my favorite because I'm a small fighter, and some roundhouse kicks, another favorite of mine. I'm left-footed but right-handed, so I like to use my left foot whenever I can. So I like
Actually, I'm going to demonstrate a head kick because that's good for my height. Okay. So you're faking the front kick, knee high. Again, knee high. I go front kick, fake, and go high.
The combination I want to show today is one of the first combinations that my coach Sam Radetsky and I developed for my first fight. This one is a bit of a longer combination, but one of the reasons we do that is because if I have a 7-punch kick combination, I'm not going to land all of that in a fight, but I might land a few of them. So the more you kind of start with, the more likely you are to land some of them. This combination makes use of things that are kind of tailored to me, so I have a long range and this kind of capitalizes on that. So we'll walk through it and then we'll do it in full speed. So the first punch in the combination is the jab, which is a nice long punch. Then I'm going to put myself in a bit of a precarious situation here. I'm just going to lean in, but I'm not really leaning to land this body jab. I'm doing it just to kind of bait them, because then I'm going to pull back and hit the 2. After that, I'll go for an inside kick, another 2, and then an outside kick, and I'll try to jab out. Jab, jab, pull, 2, kick, punch, kick. If I remember it.
That was amazing. So great to see all those women literally kicking ass. So I would like to introduce first Alison and then Jennifer, and then I'll let the two of you have a bit of a conversation. So I'm sure a lot of you already know Alison, but let me read her bio for you. Alison has a PhD in English from Simon Fraser University and is an alumna of the School for Criticism and Theory at Cornell University and the Whitney Museum of Modern Art Independent Study Program. She's a lecturer in English literature and histories of photography. Her academic research focuses on the politics of portraiture and the portrait's opposite, images of atrocity and torture. Alison currently trains and competes in kickboxing and boxing. She has a bad habit of dropping her left hand, and her best punch is a straight right. Maybe she's remedied that since the book went to press. And then Jennifer Doyle writes about art, gender, and sports. Her blog, From a Left Wing, modeled a queer feminist approach to soccer politics. She continues to write about the sexual politics of sports, often at the intersection of sport and contemporary art practice. She is the author of Campus Sex, Campus Security, Hold It Against Me, Difficulty and Emotion in Contemporary Art, and Sex Objects, Art and the Dialectics of Desire, and teaches at the University of California, Riverside. So I'm gonna throw you two into the ring and have a great conversation.
Yeah, so thank you. Let me just start by saying congratulations, Alison, on a really wonderful book. Seconds Out is a terrific read, and you know, one of the things I really that kind of it was like a surprise for me as I was reading with is that you're writing often from an autobiographical perspective as somebody who fights, but it's like you kind of take up these different elements of the experience of fighting and fighting as a sport, as a practice, and dive into really interesting histories, or you just sort of take up a kind of philosophical question around different elements of the practice of fighting, all the while like emphasizing too the genderedness of what it is that you're doing, right, as a woman who fights, right? So, so I guess I want to just begin. I mean, I have like kind of some talking points that are motivated by things that you address in specific chapters, but given what we just watched, I thought I would ask you to actually just talk to us a little bit more about why it's important to you that in approaching a conversation about your writing, that we start with a video document of women actually manifesting their favorite sequences and drills.
Yeah, sure, I would love to. I think my regret about the book, but although it's kind of inevitable, was that there was so much of me in it, which I know is kind of backward, but I wanted so much more of them, and I wanted to show the texture of just kind of everyday life in the gym and how we interact. And I think one of the things that I wanted to get at in the book is this interaction and intimacy between training partners and coaches. And I think when you just see someone in a fight, you don't get a sense of that. But there's something about asking people to show something that they care about that gives you a bit more of a glimpse of them. They're in a safe space and they're picking the thing that they love or the combination that they like the most. But there's also something about watching a person teach to someone else that shows another layer. And I think the book wouldn't exist, that my writing here wouldn't exist if it weren't for these women teaching me every day, and men, you know, all the people that I've trained with have taught me in different ways. But there's something really specific about those relationships, and I wanted to get that texture kind of to show up.
You towards the beginning of the book, I feel like this might be your second chapter. You take up like the history of women in fighting, and you have a wonderful sentence, which I very much. I mean, one could say this about almost any aspect of women and sports, but women keep fighting to break down barriers in popular history response by forgetting their names. And that's a marvelous sentence in a section in which you recount like some of the really a kind of mind-blowing spaces in the history of women in boxing in particular, or I'd say fighting insofar as some of this predates the formation of the sport as we know it. I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about some of those scenes, like you were talked a little bit about a 1906 document called The Fine Art of Jiu-Jitsu and Emily Watts, the suffragettes and fighting, like that really blew my mind. I don't know, there's just all kinds of different things that happen in that chapter. And I was wondering if you could share with people like just some of the gems that you took from just your dive into the history of this subject.
Yeah, sure. There's so much that came out of that. And like I would be remiss if I didn't say that I learned from people like Ellie Jennings and Roach, who was writing about the history of kind of martial arts and the suffragettes and self-defense. So there are these other women who've gone ahead of me and done this intense archival research that kind of made that possible. But some of these stories, yeah, the Emily Watts, I love that book. And there are these, I wish I had the pictures here, but you can look it up. There are these amazing photographs of her just like throwing people over her and like around, and just the joy in her face. She's doing it in this like 1906 book. But one of the things that I really point to in the book and that stood out to me was the way she narrates it. And I thought that was really important. There are other books from the same time, guidebooks.
Wait, hold on. Tell us how she narrates it, because they haven't read the book, so it's really amazing.
So a lot of so there are a couple of books that are like jiu-jitsu for women, and it's told like from the perspective of a man standing at the back of the room telling what the two training partners should do together. And he almost describes himself as watching them and instructing them. What Emily Watts does is she says, I wish I had that page open, but she says, you're going to throw me. So imagine you're holding me and you're doing this. And she literally writes her body into the book as their training partner. So people kept using this, and they still continue to pick it up as a kind of training manual for jiu-jitsu, or kind of judo as it was sort of more qualified then. But she wrote her body into it, which I think was really just this beautiful kind of revolutionary move. And then in real life, outside of the book, she was teaching men and women how to do jiu-jitsu. So this was something that she did in practice, but I loved the way she wrote it in as the structure.
The passages that you quoted really blew my mind, just because it is like you will grab me by the collar and throw me to the ground, right? And the passage you chose actually is also it is one in which she's being thrown. I don't know, I just found that really kind of exciting, I guess, also because it I mean, much about your book sort of you address and kind of confront like also like just like how much like learning how to take a punch is part of the training, and how there's a kind of a gender story around like allowing oneself within the kind of training context to be vulnerable or to be thrown, right? I'm just gonna like kind of sidebar, like to step outside your book for a second, right? There's this kind of like foundation text in feminist sports studies, which is the Iris Marion Young Throwing Like a Girl, and where one of the things that she writes about there is how in a gendered kind of like that as people are raised, right, as little girls, right, you get a highly gendered kind of narrative inscribes itself in your body where you are trained to be afraid of falling, right, and afraid of hurting yourself, and you kind of take up like the unraveling of that structure through training. So could you talk a little bit about that part of the writing of what you address in your regards with your own training and wrestling with that side of oneself?
Like getting used to being okay with falling or taking a hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's the scene in like the mental toughness chapter where and this one kind of obviously it stood out to me, where I was learning how to kick for the first time. And the first time I learned how to kick, I went into kickboxing and didn't know that you kick with your shins. I thought you kicked with your feet, and like I had never really seen it. And so I have really, really sensitive shins. Like I don't know if all the nerves in my body are just located in my shins, but like they're so sensitive. And so when I realized that that's what I'd be hitting them with, I was looking around like, what did I just get myself into? And the first time I kicked, I bruised my shins up, and then I would go back to kickboxing a couple of days later, and the coach is like, well, you have to kick at them again. And I literally said, I think like, I can't, they're bruised. I can't, like they hurt, I'm not going to hurt them more. And that's when I learned that that's not how it works. And so you don't just get out of it because it's bruised. He was like, and this is when my first kind of experience with that idea of mental toughness came out, because he was trying to make me hit them anyway. And I wanted to, but my leg would stop this far from the pad and it just wouldn't hit it because I've been conditioned not to want to hurt.
Yeah. One of the things I really found, so one of the things I kind of was observing and really enjoyed about the book, right, like writing about fighting and boxing in the gym in particular, right, that often one finds that the author will like kind of write from the body and write from their own lived experience, right, within a gym. And so I'm thinking of, there's a sociologist named Loïc Wacon who wrote about a working class boxing gym in Chicago. I think it was like a Black working class gym scene and all that. And he kind of grows this whole like idea of like carnal sociology out of writing from the body. But a lot of feminist writers write from the body, right, from these very different scenes. So I find this really kind of interesting intersection between like a tradition in fighting literature about like writing from the body and feminist literature in your book. And in your book, there's like this thing of like kind of like a deconditioning and a reconditioning in terms of like, so there's another like really kind of, there's a gory passage about your feet, about like moving to training in a gym that you're on like a wooden floor or something like that. And I was like horrified when I saw it. So I was like, because your feet get really torn up and yet you keep training on that. But there's this sense of like, I don't know, like, any kind of sport that one practices with the, I shouldn't make broad generalizations, but I love to play soccer, and I will play soccer until I can't move, and then I will play it again. And I still to this day live with pain that the sport gave me. And I kind of think and reflect on this often. So this might be one of the reasons why some of the sections of the book really kind of hailed me. But within a gym, there's like this other storyline that you also touch on in the book, about women in particular, like turn to fighting and martial arts training as a form of like self-defense. And there's a history to its emergence, which you address in the book, which I was illuminating for me. But also just sort of generally, like my own experience with mixed martial arts gym is like, there are really intense stories behind like why people are drawn there. And so like that chapter on mental toughness was speaking to that. I was thinking about this around like Naomi Osaka's withdrawal from the French Open, like in terms of declaring like the ecology of this sport for me is actually like super toxic, and I'm going to step away from this part of it as a kind of practice of self-care. Gyms are like, there's a kind of self-care that's really kind of embedded into the culture of each gym, and into the storyline of like how people kind of appear in the space. And I was wondering if you could share some of that part of your story in relationship to taking up fighting, and then also committing to writing about it. So that's a very long-winded question. So
No, it's good. I think like I like what you're pointing out about it being both a place where people go for self-care, and then I think the potential pitfalls or like the toxicity that can come with that. And I think that's why it's so important to kind of navigate those spaces, because you can get so much from them. But also there's always that danger that it crosses a line where you've gone for some kind of care and it's not serving you. For me, I think I didn't know I was really looking for anything. I didn't know why I was going to do that. My reason for going in and kind of taking it up wasn't self-defense, and it wasn't because I feared for anything, or even that I felt that I needed therapy. Although when I got there, I realized it was therapy. And that's kind of why I got intrigued in writing about it. But it was because I wanted to be more assertive. I felt like I wasn't confident enough, and I didn't hold my ground, and I wanted to be a better academic and teacher. And I thought, well, if you kind of find this power within you physically, it would translate in those other areas. And then there's a scene in the book where one of my classmates turns to me, a male, and says, "So what happened to you? Why are you here?" And assuming that there had to be some sort of like, violent reason that made me want to be empowered. And I was so upset. And then later looked back and went, okay, actually, I can think of a lot of reasons why I do want physical empowerment too. So maybe he wasn't that far off, but I really resented the implication at the time.
yeah, that's really, but it's an interesting thing too, in terms of like gender dynamics, because like he can ask that same question of anyone in the gym. But when you ask that of a feminine subject, right, of a girl or a woman in the gym, it's like drops you into a very narrow storyline, and it's like that mere fact may be why you're there, right? Like not because there's like some trauma that's chasing you that you need to turn and confront in the boxing ring. And well, actually, even as I say that, I'm like, it's hard for me to picture like any boxing narrative that doesn't have that, right? Including that for men. Is that for women, it's sexual assault, right? Is that story that gets like sexualized forms of violence and harassment. That's like the socially prescribed narrative as to why you're there, the thing that's given. But I don't know, that's one of the things that just really interests me, I guess, about gyms, and also about like gender in gyms, and the way, I don't know, that you kind of have to work all that stuff out and work that out together.
I think some of that, like maybe it's like a circle, because I start thinking about those things, like the embodied memory. There's that scene in the book where I kind of remember all of these things that had happened that I hadn't even acknowledged, because the physical kind of component of training brought them out. Like the same way, I don't know if this is real, but like when you stretch your hips in yoga, you have all those feelings. Like I feel like there are ways that the actual training brings that out. And like, so maybe I didn't go in for it, but I realized it was there once I
I think there's a real like connection. I mean, for me, I'd say that like the only two kinds of physical practices that really meant it's not like that you're working out like grievances that one carries like into the scene of like talking to a therapist, but that all kinds of stuff gets written into your body that you don't necessarily see until you start a training practice, like a regular kind of practice where you develop an intentional relationship to your body. And yoga is of course one practice where that is often like people's experience. And fighting, there's something so like about the precision of the training that's required, and also like you have to get past inhibition, right? That there's like a sense of resistance to, whether that be to throwing a punch or receiving one, or just like to loosening up. Like there are all these kinds of things that for me were like a real struggle. Like I'm very like stiff, and have no sense of like rhythm. Like I'm, like that, I had to really like kind of, like learn like what a physical practice that had a lightness and a sense of rhythm to it might be, and I can see that there's a story about control in my body, right? That was actually something that was making my body not a very effective instrument. So, and I don't know that I could even talk about that if I hadn't done, even though like I was like a fitness boxer, never like, I sparred like a couple times, like for real in England. And the guy whose gym I was training in, Joey, here, before I went to England for a year, I told him I was going to like try to find a gym there. And he's like, you better get ready to get hit in the face, because that's actually what happens over there.
Can you tell us about getting hit in the face?
Oh, I was like, even though like it was terrible. I really wanted to be able to, like, I really wanted to be I wanted to be able to spar. And I crumbled. I felt like I was a terrible sparring partner. Like for me, it was more that I felt like my own inhibitions and it's like I could receive a punch, but I didn't know how to punch back after being hit. Like, so I just felt like a really bad conversation partner, and I was having a lot of emotion too in that moment. So that's something that you write about in the book. Like there's a chapter that's quite separate from the chapter on mental toughness, right? That's on crying. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
That chapter, what you do in that chapter?
I think like every section of the book, I read a lot of different kind of fight books and fight histories and memoirs, and there were really consistent themes that came up, and a lot of them had to do with what it means to be a man or how to interact. And I felt like there were all of these questions that weren't being asked, or things that weren't really being addressed. And one of them was definitely the emotion and the crying. And so in the book, the story about my first sparring experience was you're going in, sparring with a bunch of people, just getting hit in the face, loving it, being super proud of myself, getting to my car, like thinking I'm the coolest person ever. And then I get 2 blocks and realize that I'm weeping and I just can't stop crying. I'm like pull into a gas station parking lot and I can't stop crying and I don't understand it. And so this is one kind of version of, crying, but there are other ones, because I'm somebody who, when I get angry, I cry. And when I get frustrated, I cry. And like, that's not a convenient thing if you're trying to exist in this space where you're supposed to be really tough and like not convey your emotion. And when you're fighting, you're not supposed to show emotion because it gives something away. Even if you are upset or stressed or scared, you don't want to show it. You have to learn to mask it. So, or you have to find a way not to feel it, but that's different. But so for me, this relationship between crying and fighting, I couldn't separate them. And I would see this with other people, and I felt like I wanted to know more about it. And that's what got me to kind of explore the relationship between crying, because I would watch UFC fights or I'd watch boxing fights and I'd see men crying all the way up to the ring or crying in the ring after, right, with no shame about it. And everyone accepts it. So then you have someone like Rose Namajunas, who before one of her fights, people were saying wasn't mentally fit, and they were questioning her ability to go through with it because she had been crying and sparring. But for me, that felt really like self-explanatory. Well, she was frustrated with how it went. Of course she was crying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I'm like, I don't know that I try to think if I've ever cried in like playing soccer. I can't. I'll get almost emotional talking about it. I got injured playing soccer, and I knew that was probably the last time I was going to play. And I can't but that's a different kind of grief, because that's the grief over actual concrete loss. Whereas the kind of crying you're describing is more, and that you write about in the book, is I don't even want to say an overwhelm, but it's like there's a kind of energy that happens like around sparring, but I don't know, maybe like a displacement of energy, but it's like, it's a very different kind of emotion story, I guess. And I'm like, is that particular to striking sports? Because I can picture this with boxing and I can picture this with MMA, but I can't picture it with just pure grappling. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah. I'm not good enough at grappling to be able to speak to that.
Yeah, maybe I don't know if there's people in the audience who might want to throw up in chat, like if they have good stories or memories of like wrestlers like crying on their way off the mat. I don't know. One thing I wanted to sort of comment on, because you were talking about like the desire like to be more, I don't know, in control or assertive in teaching, and like, and I don't know if, or have you been teaching sports literature or sports stuff at all, or?
I haven't, that or not yet anyway.
Yeah, I want to encourage you to do this, because first of all, your book is amazing, and so I know I don't personally often teach my own writing, but this would be a case where even just sharing like an excerpt of some of your writing would be really amazing.
My students would all know what my stuffed animals were named.
Well, it depends on what you share, but
Okay.
one of the things I found with teaching in sports, and in particular, like if you show any interest in like mixed martial arts, jujitsu, anything in that kind of universe, wrestling, is at least I'm in Southern California, so quite a large percentage of my students, if they're not fans, they're actually in the gym themselves, and it's like this it's such a transformative experience to like have that side of yourself recognized as a source of like wisdom, insight, and intelligence, and as you know, as a zone that you can actually like that can be a space of learning but also teaching and pedagogy. So I found myself thinking about that when you were showing the 8-minute video in the beginning, but also as I was reading and thinking about sharing the work, I think it's like the presence of your voice in the text, and then also like the sharing out of all these kinds of histories and different perspectives of elements of the story of women in fighting. Anyway, just it's kind of a pleasure to teaching sports, so I'm going to encourage you.
Yeah, no, it sounds like fun, actually. Yeah.
Do you think one of the reasons why you like imprinted so like hard on like the gym was like, as somebody who's been, you know, one teaches as a graduate student and then one's teaching, you kind of get, is it like just being a student? I know for me that was something too about like being in that position as a learner.
I think so, absolutely. Like the kind of emotional, I don't know if it's baggage or unpacking after finishing the degree and being a teacher. And there was something really freeing about not having to be an expert, because there was no way I could be. So it kind of took that off my shoulders. I think one of the things was that I just really craved something physical after that. Like after just doing school and kind of living in that space, I felt really disconnected from my physical self.
Yeah.
And so there was just like this whole part of me that I had not been dealing with, like just had not been engaging with it.
Yeah,
so I think that it was part of both of those.
Yeah, academic work takes a real toll on your body. And a friend of mine, every now and again, when she's trying to stage interventions for me, like she's like, don't let your job take your body. Which it will. I think that's a pretty common story for a lot of us who turn to sports late in life as academics. So like, what made you like turn to write? Like, how did this become a writing project? I'm gonna, you know, when you started out, you didn't start out like to write like a cultural history of like women in fighting, and so you're gonna fight. Like that's not how this happened.
No, not at all. And I never intended to fight. So like the book and the fighting all kind of just came about like a snowball that gets momentum, I guess. But I think it was this thing I was just doing quietly for myself, because I was almost ashamed of it, because it seemed like so not me, and I didn't fit. And I couldn't imagine myself in that space as the kind of body that was supposed to be doing that. And like the wrong age and just everything. And I didn't feel old until I walked in a gym and everyone was younger than me. And I was told like, you could never be a fighter, you're already way too old. So it's like a different scale of age walking in that space. But the more I struggled at the beginning, and it was a really steep learning curve, especially at the start, to think about myself differently and challenge myself. And I kept hitting these walls where I was finding my weaknesses and my limits. And there was something about that was just really fascinating. And I wanted to kind of take note of it and keep track of it, because I could, you know, there are moments in your life when you see yourself changing. And I remember the first year of university being one of those for me. Every day I learned something that blew my mind. It was like, this changes everything. And then the next day there'd be something new. Yeah. And this was like that, like every week I just felt like, oh, I just opened up something I never even thought about. And so it was a more organic process of just taking notes for a while. And then this past year, I just was talking with like my coach and my friends and coworkers, just kind of the few people that I talked to about fighting, and it just kind of unraveled from there. So it was pretty organic, and I had just been thinking about it for so long.
Well, I'm really glad that you did turn your pen to the project. I want to ask you to talk a little bit about, this is something that that you address in the book, about how you got through the past year, and how did you manage to train? You know, just could you tell us a little bit about the story of maintaining your training under the lockdown and COVID conditions?
Yeah, it was this. There's a way that I always want to be growing and moving forward. And so I would keep training, and I would train before COVID. I would be training like 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and always trying to get better, because I know that I'm not getting any younger, and I don't want to plateau. I want to keep going for as long as I can. And so I would keep pushing myself. And then when everything shut down, I had this sense of panic, like, how do I grow when I'm all by myself? And that's when I kind of realized that there's a kind of agency in going to class every day. But once you get there, the hard part is getting there. And then everyone kind of carries you through because you're in that mode. So in a weird way, I feel like I went backward this year, but I also went forward in that I had to be my own motivator, and I had to do everything by myself. And so I have to say that I wasn't actually alone in that. I had my virtual people. And so the story that I talk about in the book is my coach and Sam. So the Sams and we would correspond and make videos. So my coach would make videos and give like the homework assignment for the day. And then I would go off in the park and I would do the homework assignment and I would film it. And it was like a thing that got me putting my shoes on and out the door. Slowly, I compiled different kind of like gear that I could use by myself. I took up running. I injured myself a lot. I learned, the thing I was missing was hitting things. So the only way I could simulate the fight training or the feeling I got was first to try to run really fast, which is how I hurt myself.
Yeah.
And because my body's like, you don't run, what are you doing? But so there are ways that I was trying to get that thing that kind of clicks in my brain from fighting. And then the other one was kind of getting turned on by like the Sams to hitting a tire with a sledgehammer. And then like just there's something about knowing I'm real and present in the world because I get to hit something that was really, really useful. So there's a way that evolved, but it was a process of virtually studying with other people and me in Stanley Park, and then later kind of like every now and then meeting up with people individually, but I was pretty much alone. So Tomoko, who you see in the video first, in the last like few weeks, we started to kind of meet up and train again. But before that, there was just this desire to like, you know, being alone in an apartment by myself with everything shut down, like it started to feel like I was disappearing. Yeah. So the videos and everything helped.
You write really beautifully about shadow boxing too in that section of the book, and about I think you got an assignment, was that from your trainer? About, yes. You know, you had to like record yourself basically shadow boxing and then also do an analysis of the fight. So it's like to compose a whole fight. And I don't want to, I just want to point readers to that passage because it's just beautiful writing, and also an homage to the difficulty of shadow boxing and the art of shadow boxing. We have a couple questions from members of the audience. Alana, did you want to bring them in?
I'll pop back in. I just want to say, once we're talking about sledgehammers, that I'm really glad we did our editing at a distance, Alison.
I'm pretty good at controlling it. It's not for you. The sledgehammer keeps strange men from talking to me in the park.
Sometimes.
Like it literally, like I'm not kidding, it's 100% effective. If I'm shadowboxing, like someone will come up and be like, you should smile. But if I have a sledgehammer, someone walked up, saw the sledgehammer, apologized, and then just turned around. So it has like multiple functions that it serves, but I would never turn my sledgehammer on you.
Good to know.
Thank you.
Yeah, just carry one, even if you're not going to use it.
It's a good strategy. So we have two questions from the audience, both from Wendy. The first one is, do you feel that you have written the female body into your book? Which I think you've kind of answered, but maybe there's more you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. That was my goal. And I think that another reason for showing those videos was, again, to show these female bodies at work. One of the things I do talk about in the book is about the difference between watching different bodies go through the motions of fighting or training or technique, and how it translates very differently. You could see my coach is very tall and lanky and male. And so the way things work for him will be very different than for me. And so there are different training partners that as we develop our kind of understanding of what we're doing, we have to fight our own fight. We have to do things differently. The way you fight will not be the same as the way somebody really tall or really short fights. So the female body is one that's really useful for me to watch, because I want to see people who are my size doing the same stuff. So I know I can do it. And I know what it looks like, because it won't look the same for them. So that is definitely one of my goals.
Yeah, that's a really, just as an interesting like kind of project to think about, like what writing the female body into sports literature looks like. And, you know, and I think it's a lot of us will have like the experience of, it's like, I'll take a yoga class as an example. I'm not normally like a difficult yoga student, right? But I walked out of a class once because the instructor just kept talking about shoulders as a masculine part of the body. And it really bothered me, you know, like, and maybe it bothered me too as somebody like who has, you know, like I'm kind of small frame, but the first part of my body where muscles really kind of happen tends to be in my shoulders. And I feel really proud of that, you know? So there was this thing like where, and it was also like, it's like we all have shoulders, you know? So like, why like take this, you know? And I was like, what do you mean by, you know, and I just was like, and this instructor kept going there. And there's a difference between like that kind of narrative. And then I had a different teacher in the same studio where that teacher would talk about, well, you know, most men's bodies are shaped this way. And it means that on most men, the center of gravity is here. And so this pose will, you know, maybe work better for you if you do it this way. And so it would be like, you know, it wouldn't assume that by in a term like masculine, feminine, man or woman or whatever gendered word you were using, wouldn't assume that there was any intelligence about the body just in that word, right? And kind of what just create a little bit of distance between masculine and feminine or male and female and the body and the way that he instructed. And it was so illuminating just because there were things that required specific kinds of upper body strength. And I hadn't always, you know, and I always took it as a given that I understood that like, okay, women have less upper body strength. And his means of instruction was that women's weight is distributed differently across the body. And so when you're doing balancing poses, this is the kind of strength you need to actually do that. And so like, I would think that like, you know, until I was having my consciousness raised about this, I might look at a man doing this, something I was trying to do, and he wasn't struggling and I was. And suddenly like after this class, I was like, oh, that's not necessarily about upper body strength. It's actually about like the distribution of muscle and weight across your form. Right. And so whether, you know, just where the weight is concentrated and where your muscles concentrated, and like, it's liberating when you start to unravel that from gender. And I do think fighting, especially because if you're in a mixed martial arts gym or a martial arts gym or a boxing gym, you're often actually working with men, right? Like you're often working across the gender difference in terms of your training. And I think it's a really important kind of part of that process. Yeah. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, that's something that I really like about it. Depending on the day, it's either extremely frustrating to me or the thing that I like the most. But I want to kind of maybe just add to something before I forget. You were talking about that awareness of different weight distributions or how the bodies kind of work. there is the whole chapter that kind of deals with anatomy and biology, and that's a place where I'm least comfortable, but I draw on a lot of experts that hopefully are talking about kind of different bodies. But there's this way that certain things are just kind of defaulted as male and certain moves in the male body, and so that I think that's why it is so important to see female bodies doing them and them looking different, but also the discussion about things like menstrual cycles. And there's a woman I mentioned in the book, Sylvie von Douglas Itu, who's a Muay Thai fighter, who has actually been doing all of this work to kind of track how she's a different fighter depending on where she is in terms of the stage of her menstrual cycle, and how like your body or how the body retains fear or responds to fear or emotion in different ways depending on where she is in that. And I think there's just so many really interesting ways that kind of embodiment can affect things.
It's really important. I have a sister who's a coach, and she coached high school girls cross country for a long time, and did a lot of work with her athletes in terms of as part of their well-being is monitoring the iron levels in their blood. And because one of the things that she had noticed is that as girls in high school are getting older, they'd sort of plateau, right? Or they'd be really good and then they'd move backwards. And that's partly just about their kind of pathway through puberty, and then like the impact that their menstrual cycle is actually taking in terms of the iron levels in their blood. And that combined with cross country, which is a very repetitive thing in terms of the pounding on your body as you run, that also has an impact on your iron levels over time. So she did a lot of research on that, and I feel like she was pretty much on her own as a coach, that there weren't really people you could talk to. And I shouldn't speak for my sister this way, but we haven't really had a conversation on exactly this topic, but when I watched her go through her own competing career as a D1 track athlete, some of the health issues that she was struggling with, right? It was really hard to get addressed. And also like, you couldn't really talk about it with your coaches, whether or not it was related to puberty or adolescence or your reproductive anything, right? That actually just acknowledging, right, that your body, that you might not be well in some way is actually really hard to do, especially if you're a competitive athlete. I think Wendy had a second question.
Yeah. Can you note how the body and the rhythm of the fight meet and diverge?
That's a really nice question, and I'm not entirely sure how to answer it. How the body and the rhythm of the fight. Well, I mean, in a general way, and I don't know if this is answering it at all, but there are different ways that you train for different things. So if I were doing long distance, I would train in a way that was about endurance. But for, say, a fight where you have a number of 2-minute rounds, I guess, if you're a woman, you would want to train your muscles and your body and your system to be able to do these bursts of 2 minutes. And so being able to run for an hour isn't going to help in that context. So you train your body and your muscles and your breathing so that it works best in this really like short kind of 2-minute or 3-minute bursts, depending on, or 5 minutes if you're doing MMA. And so that would be true for anyone, regardless of gender or sex. But there's a really interesting thing about that for me, that being fit doesn't just look the same, or being in shape doesn't look the same, that you almost shape the way your body functions for this very specific purpose. And you kind of train for that, which
I'd say too, there's like there's like the rhythm of the drills, right? Which is like this kind of uninterrupted rhythm, or it's like it gets disrupted by the places where you kind of fail, right? But it has like even the woman who was doing the kind of like bobbing the head, you could see that once she was kind of slipping into the rhythm of it, I felt like that video sort of goes off into a fade, and she's like could do that forever because she was clearly in her happy place. And that definitely has to do with like kind of getting into a rhythm and also kind of zone. But when you're like in a fight itself, the thing is you're really trying to prevent your opponent from ever getting into a rhythm, right? So there's an antagonistic relationship between the rhythms of the fighters that you're watching, right? Yeah, I guess
I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. We were talking about it like trying to interrupt someone before they can get through their sentence. So then I apparently just interrupted you in the middle of a sentence right at that point. But
that's I'm like, exactly, right? So
our next question is from Sam. Do you have specific fight related goals, and have they changed after writing the book?
I would like to keep fighting. I don't know if I have specific goals. My goal every time is to go in and be the best version of myself, which doesn't necessarily mean winning. It doesn't always mean winning. But there's a way that I try to like level up with each fight. And so that's always my goal, is to feel like I'm capable of something more than I was the fight before. I think writing the book helped me. There was a way that, because I was training mostly just off by myself, and I didn't get to maybe improve physically in the same way, that the mental game is where I kind of spent the last year. And so I'm interested to see, once I get back in good shape, like what that kind of mental training does, and hopefully it will make me a smarter fighter.
What advice would you give to someone unfamiliar with combat sports who wants to take the first steps on a similar journey?
Oh.
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I think that you have to get in the gym and like kind of just let go of your fear on that front. And also, like, when you're totally new, it's not like anybody's gonna throw you into a sparring situation right away. And unless that's what you're looking for, then you should go find that, right? But it's probably not wise. But there's a lot of what happens, just for someone who's never done something like that. A lot of what happens when you go to the gym is fitness, right? It's just getting yourself warmed up, drilling skills, right? And then usually there'll be something that might be like just kind of like drilling skills with mats, right? With mitts at the end, right? And or sparring, depending on your level. So for me, I had no idea. Like, I just pictured you went in and you were like rolling around on the ground and like hitting each other like from the start. So I was a totally naive person when I first stepped into it was a mixed martial arts gym, and I never got to a point where I was ever sparring. But that's more a statement about me than what was possible in that space. Alison, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because people assume that like they have to walk in the gym and like there's a trial by fire, like go fight the biggest person before you're allowed to try anything. But gyms will have trials, and I think a lot of the best gyms have a way that you can try classes out. They should have maybe somebody, if they have enough staff, someone set aside who will show you the basics and kind of work with you and ease you in. And I think like that those structures are often there. So it's not it's scary to walk in a different space, and one that if you don't know if you feel like you kind of fit there. But the thing is, everybody goes in for the first time not really knowing anything. And I will see huge muscular people who look really, really tough and strong and confident. And then it doesn't actually mean that they know how to fight. So regardless of how you look or you feel, you could go in and everyone starts at the same place. So I think knowing that everybody's embarrassed and everybody gets it wrong is helpful.
There's a really interesting question from Shannon. Do you mind if I go to that one?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say, I don't know enough about Muay Thai. I'm assuming that's what we're talking about this. There's recent news that women are now being permitted to fight in Lumpini Stadium in Bangkok. On the subject more broadly, do women in fighting have the ability to create social change by symbolizing a feminine power and not just inside the ring? And so, my most casual understanding is that women have historically been barred from the stadium. Alison, do you know much about this story, and did you want to comment on it?
I hadn't heard that they were allowed in, so that is great. This is one of the things I think a lot of female Muay Thai fighters either struggle with or don't. And I wouldn't say that every Muay Thai fighter does, because for some women, the idea that they have to kind of pass under the rope, or that they are just not allowed to fight in certain places, they accept that as part of the tradition, because especially in Thailand, Muay Thai is it's got a rich, long history, and you accept that you're kind of taking on part of that and becoming part of something that was there before you. And then other people just really have a hard time not being accepted into certain spaces. So I think that women fighting contribute to social change. I think we see that. But again, as we discussed at the beginning, sometimes we have that change and then it's like it's fixed, and then everyone just forgets and goes back. So I'm not 100% optimistic, but I'm
Yeah.
like, I see that there are steps for sure.
Yeah, I love that question too, because for me, it goes back to the point that you made about, it's like you have women fight and then their accomplishments are immediately forgotten. So like, yes, it seems surely to me like a really great development. But it only matters for other like women fighters to the degree to which that is accompanied by a larger kind of transformation in terms of the inclusion of women, and I'd also say trans fighters, gender non-binary fighters, like the inclusion of more gender diversity in terms of the sport at all levels, right? Which includes like training, gym ownership, like reporting, right? The media structures that are the kind of often undergirding the economies around the sports. Like, so it takes a kind of a sustained commitment. I mean, like, as you point out, right? Like women have been fighting as pretty much as long as people have been fighting, women have been fighting. And there are these kind of hilarious moments where you kind of gesture quite casually to just like, I can't remember now. I think that's, yeah, that's, I just, because there's like the organized fighting, and then there's also just like fisticuffs, right? And and it's like if you've known women long enough, right? It's like, and kind of worked with kids long enough, girls fight. So anyway, but it's a really great question, because I think it does go to, it's not just a matter of like a woman being the pathfinder, right? It's about everything that happens around the sport. So.
Yeah, and the definitions of even what a woman is in those cases, because there are examples in the book, and we can find other ones of different trans fighters who either are or are not accepted within those stadiums, or were not.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just in a clubhouse with Pat Mauricio, who's a trans man boxer, and who's the first openly trans boxer to be licensed, and he won his first professional fight. And a lot of the narratives that are out there about the biological capacities of men and women, and having, like these like huge advantages that the athlete who goes through a masculinizing pubescence will have, that no amount of hormone, whatever, is going to undo, or is actually like really complicated by the stories of trans men who are competing at the highest levels of their sports. Because by that like transphobic and misogynist logic, right, nobody who's been through a feminizing adolescence should be winning a pro sport, right? Never, or like competing in the Olympics. So I really like grateful to the example of those athletes and to trans women athletes for all that they demonstrate about what's possible. I wanted to just address the question about what makes a gym a welcoming space for female athletes. Just because I think it's a really important question, and I don't know if we're running out of time or not. Like, I'm not sure, but I want to make sure that got addressed.
Yeah, we can go a couple minutes over, but I don't want to keep you too long, keep everybody waiting. So yeah, go ahead. Do either of you have thoughts on that, on making a welcoming space?
Did you want to answer that, or do you want to?
Actually, I'll throw that to you first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things. There are some examples in the book about like little cues, like I think one boxer has the pink door in her gym that kind of weeds out anyone who's really, really concerned about being macho, just without even talking about it. But I think that there are really great things that I've seen gyms do, like having women only training period, or for people who identify as women, where they have training periods set aside. And DCS gym in Vancouver, where I train, has sessions like that, and they have a lot of women's only classes as well as mixed ones. But I think there are other things too, just like the visibility of having female coaches, and what kind of facilities are available for women, or what kind of options are there in terms of trials and payment, and what kind of bathrooms do you have, even for people from different kind of genders and different sexes. So there are ways the physical space really speaks to that, but also how you talk to people and how they see things modeled in the space.
Yeah, and I'd say like pay attention to the athletes in your gym. And so like if you're like a cisgendered guy and you have a woman or gender nonconforming person in your gym, like I think being a good ally and keeping an eye out for folks without being like patriarchal and overbearing protector, just kind of, I think, something that's like a learning process about what figuring out what that is. And like keeping an eye out too for just like, I don't know, like sexist jokes and things like that are so like part of the culture in a lot of ways, in a lot of sports, so hardly specific to boxing gyms or martial arts. And that, I don't know, just sort of keeping an eye out for that kind of thing, and being open to conversation and non-defensive, and also like when they're like, say for example, you only have a few girls or women in the gym, like that experience is going to be likely new for everybody, like for the girls and the women and for the guys. And I think like being open to conversation, non-defensive when somebody says like, "Hi, that was really offensive," or I think this person's holding back on me because I'm a girl, or I think this person is actually more violent, because they don't want to be beaten by a girl. I know for me in soccer, like some of the most aggressive tackling has come from guys who are like at or like just below my level, and it seemed to make them angry, or just they felt like they needed to prove something, and I think that kind of thing can happen. And like the thing is that like especially in a gym where you have like a daily training kind of practice, it's like really important to work it out. You actually have to be able to talk that kind of stuff out. But I don't think it's as hard. I think it's like stepping into the gym for the first time. It's like you're stepping into a different kind of fight. For the first time, and at first it's really disorienting and you don't know what to do, but over time you actually learn how to trust each other and develop a space for conversation. I do think when it really is new to the whole gym, it's kind of a big deal. But if people come at it with compassion and respect for each other, it's really rewarding for everyone.
I think just to add to that, one of the things that I remember my coach at Allied doing was really encouraging assistant coaches that the first person you work with is a woman, so that like that also kind of weeds people out, and it shows people right away when they come in the gym. It sets the tone that like these are the people that you listen to, and it's not just like, so yeah, there are these ways that you can like have those conversations or kind of set things up before it gets to that point. But then I think just because the sheer amount of people going through it, that you need to learn how to communicate.
Michelle asks, as an academic who relies so much on your mind, how do you respond to critiques of fighting for its impact on the brain, and think through the head trauma you might be receiving yourself?
I try not to think about it, but I am very, I think there is a kind of a discussion about that. There's a chapter on biology and anatomy, and it kind of starts with me getting, for one reason or the other, being not kind of like fully in my head after sparring, and I get migraines too, and so there are ways that sometimes that has a similar effect. But I try to have good defense and not get hit, but obviously it doesn't work that way. So it is something I'm mindful of. I think I've seen a lot of people at different stages. If you get concussions, it's kind of like loosening the jar. You continue to get them more frequently. And I think it means being mindful of that. And I've been really lucky so far. But if I were finding myself, it just takes like one or two. If I find myself getting a concussion, then I have to rethink how I'm going to train.
Yeah, that's a concern, of course, for us, any kind of striking sport. It's also a concern in soccer, which is really my home sport. And I'll say, like, I definitely took a couple knocks to the head that really scared me, and it kept on playing. So it's definitely a really challenging issue, and yeah. Right,
so it didn't stop you. Is this like a calculated risk?
No, I mean, what took me out of the sport was my leg. It's my, so as it is for a lot of people in that sport. But it's also relatively uncommon. So a lot of the stuff around head injuries is about the repetition. And so for me, it was actually a really rare event, partly because I'm not playing at that high a level. But at the highest levels of the sport, it's a very big concern, especially for players who are about my age, when there was not any real awareness about the cumulative effect of head injuries on players, and so especially defenders. So I'll say this is something that in soccer people are still trying to account for, but I mean, you still see people going on the field in games that you wonder whether that's still the case. And I'd say things are definitely better than they used to be on that front. So.
Yeah.
One last quick question. Alison, has your commitment to fighting changed since completing this book?
No, I mean, I'm itching to just keep on fighting. I think I don't think my commitment's changed. I think maybe the way I think about it has changed, but it's maybe just richer or deepened. But I love it more than ever. So I would like to keep fighting, and hopefully I won't get knocked in the head too much.
That seems like a good note to end on. Unless, Alison, do you have any last words you want to share with the audience?
No, I mean, thank you so much to both of you and for everyone who's here. It's really exciting to get to talk about it. And I think that this is already starting to get more opportunities to hear about all the other women who fight that I didn't know fought. So I'm excited about that. So thank you.
Book. It's a really great book and a very teachable, says the English professor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking the time to have this conversation. The two of you are so amazing as interlocutors. And Alison, congrats on the book. I hope all of you in the audience will grab a copy at your favorite indie bookstore or at the Coach House link that we just put in the chat. And on that note, we'll ring the bell, I guess. So thanks so much. You have to. You can't not make the boxing jokes, you know? So thanks so much, everyone. Good night.